Welcome to another episode of Navigating the Wilderness. I'm Nicole Delaney. For those of you joining us for the first time, welcome. I hope that wherever you are on your spiritual journey, whether you are in a difficult wilderness season or you find yourself transitioning from one season to another, maybe you're in this fog right now and you can't quite discern what God has for you next. My prayer is that as you listen to these episodes, you would begin to recognize God speaking to you in your own life, where he's leading you, how he's guiding you, and you would have more confidence to be able to take the next step that he shows you as you move forward. So today we're going to talk more about the spiritual seasons. We've been in this series for a few weeks now where we've been talking about spiritual seasons of life, and I was using the Middle East as the backdrop for our discussions because when we look at the Bible, we see the Middle East as the backdrop of these stories, and so it's helpful to understand spiritual seasons from that perspective. Last week, we talked about seasons of flourishing, and seasons of flourishing in our life are times that we experience the blessing of God on our life. We can sense this overflow happening, this favor and grace on our life that we previously maybe didn't experience in that way, or we've been in this time of growth and we face some opposition, and now it feels like we're almost like in a mountaintop experience, and it's quite an exciting time. We feel like we have more than we need. We're able to bless other people. And then it seems like all of a sudden the season shifts again and the life that we had suddenly changes and the things that had life on them suddenly change. And we find ourselves in this place of dryness, this dry season. If we look at it from the Middle Eastern perspective, the time of flourishing in the Middle East is the springtime. It's when the land has been transformed. It's lush, it's green, it's full of flowers, it's full of life. There's a harvest season that takes place where they're harvesting wheat and barley that have been growing all winter and into spring. And it's such a life-giving time. And the land looks beautiful. And then suddenly the rain stops, usually at the end of May, beginning of June. Although I was there in June of 2023 and we had this very unusual day of rain. I was told it's extremely rare to experience that in June. But usually the rain ends in May. And then the land dries up in June, July, August, September, into October before they finally get the early rains and the land softens a little bit that they can plow it and begin to plant seed again. So there's this season in between this time of planting and this time that we had been flourishing previously where we have this wilderness, this dry period where it feels like there's no life happening. There's nothing really going on. It's just very dry. And that time can be very disorienting and very perplexing when we experience it. Because previously, everything was life-giving and things were we were hearing the Lord very clearly. Things were flowing freely into our life. We felt like there was this blessing. And then suddenly the provision dries up or the resources. Maybe it's not necessarily financial. It could be spiritual. Maybe something that we were involved in suddenly doesn't produce life anymore in us. And we just are like, what's going on? Why do I feel like spiritually dry? Why am I feeling like I'm not hearing God's voice? And the temptation is to think something's wrong with us or that we've done something wrong, that suddenly we're in this season. But really, it's just a process that God is bringing us into because there's something he's cultivating and working in us and working out of us at the same time. This transformation that's taking place. It's almost like a cocoon season if you think about it from the perspective of a butterfly going into a cocoon. It feels like there's nothing happening, but there's this transformation that's taking place while the caterpillar is in this cocoon. And then when it emerges, it's a beautiful butterfly. It's a completely different creature than when it went into this cocoon. And I believe that's what God is doing with us when we go into a wilderness or a dry season. There's a transformation that's taking place. And maybe something that was for a different season that had life on it, it was great at that time. And for some reason, all of a sudden, it's not for us anymore because God has something else in mind, but he has to prepare our heart to be able to receive it. He has to prepare us to be able to steward that thing. And often it's us that's in the way. And it's maybe our mindsets, it's our belief about ourselves, it's our belief about God. Those are things that have to be dismantled and changed, and he needs to put new belief systems in us in order for us to take part in that next season that he's bringing us into. And it's a very uncomfortable place to be in. I was remembering, like, I had been in a wilderness before, in my life. And it was a time where God was really teaching me a lot about spiritual warfare. And that can happen often in a wilderness season as well. And I saw God's faithfulness through that season. And I believe if you've been through a wilderness in the past, you've experienced God's faithfulness on the other side of it. And you can hold on to that when you are in a wilderness again. It may be different than the last time because there may be something new that God's cultivating inside of you and preparing you for that's quite different from what you've experienced in the past. But you can take those things that you saw before that God did in your life and you can hold on to those things because He's going to do even better in this season. The other thing that happens a lot of times is we receive a word from the Lord and He speaks to us about our identity or about something that He's speaking into our life for a new season. Maybe He has a new direction for us to take and He begins to speak to us. It's almost like a burning bush moment, if you will. But sometimes we can't see what God sees inside of us. He's speaking to us and saying, I see this in you. This is where I'm taking you. And maybe we're not ready to believe it yet. And that's kind of what happened to me. Back in 2018, I was still working in my career in advertising and marketing. And that was the year that everything kind of shifted. My boss passed away, and I just sensed that things were changing. I knew there was some change on the horizon. I just didn't quite understand it. But I remember halfway through that year, God began to speak to me about the things He put inside of me that He had for me to do in the future. And it didn't make any sense at the time. I mean, in some ways it did because I felt like He had spoken some of that to me through dreams and things before. But I remember I couldn't see that in myself. I had been doing the things that I had been doing for so long for a career that I couldn't imagine doing anything differently. So I just continued on that year until the end of the year, and my husband and I had decided that I was going to leave my job and go into personal training. And that just seemed like a natural fit. My husband had been a personal trainer for a while. He still is to this day. And I had always been into health and wellness. I was ready to do something new, and I thought this would be great for us to go into business together. So that's what we planned to do. I got my certifications in the spring of that year. And then after I left my job, I started training with my husband that year, and I started building up a clientele. So I was going into like kind of a growing season, selling and growing and beginning to build this business with my husband. And then all of a sudden, it was January of 2020, and I had this really powerful dream. I say powerful because it was just a vivid dream. And I was looking up at the stars in this dream. It was nighttime, and the stars were so bright, like beyond anything I've seen in the natural. And I remember just being like in awe over the sky. And then suddenly I lowered my eyes after looking at the sky for some time. I lowered my eyes to the horizon line, and there was a bridge in front of me, and there was a lion standing on the bridge. And I jumped at first because it startled me to see a lion there, of course, because obviously most of the time lions are not creatures you want to be near. But when I saw the eyes of the lion, I calmed down because I recognized this lion. He had been in my other dreams before, and I knew it was Jesus just from the eyes. The eyes of this lion were very gentle, and they didn't create fear. They were very gentle. They were very inviting. And I remember he looks over at me, and he kind of like looks over his shoulder as if to say, follow me. He doesn't actually vocalize it, but he looks at me and he's just like, follow me. And he turns around and he starts to walk over this bridge, and I follow him over the bridge. And then he leads me into the woods. And then there were these people on the other side of the woods. I won't go into the details of who they were, but I recognized based on who was standing there that, okay, this is where God's leading me. But I knew the woods. Well, first of all, I'll say this. When you see a bridge, oftentimes it's a transition. You're moving from one season to the other. I mentioned that in one of my previous episodes. And so I knew I was going into a new place, but I was not excited about it because there was a reassurance to me that God was leading me. But the woods to me represented a difficult time because I thought about anytime I would dream about the woods, it was usually a place of difficulty. Like if you think of the phrase, we're not out of the woods yet. So God knows that speaks to me in that way. And so He knew to show me I'm walking into the woods with Him. And I knew it was a season of wilderness. In the West, often we think of the word wilderness and we think of a wilderness with lots of trees and forests and all of that. Obviously, in the Middle East, it's not like that at all. The wilderness is the desert. And so we experience a desert season, a dry season when we go through the wilderness. But this was January of 2020. And obviously, I didn't know we were all going to really go into the wilderness that year with everything that was going on in the world. I wasn't excited about it because I knew it was going to be difficult. I had been through a wilderness before, and it was very difficult, and it lasted many years. And so I was not excited about the idea of going into another one. But it gave me comfort to know I was being led there. You think of Jesus being baptized in the River Jordan, and the Holy Spirit descends upon him, and his identity is spoken to him by the Lord. This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. And then immediately he's led into the wilderness, which isn't far away from the Jordan River, by the way. And he's in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights, being ministered to by angels, but experiencing all of the temptations that come with the desert and the spiritual warfare that he was encountering. And so it was similar for me, where I was feeling like, okay, I'm being led into this. This is something that everyone goes into when you're being called into something new. If you look in the Bible, this is like a repeated pattern over and over and over again, that when someone is anointed for something, then the Lord leads them into the wilderness. Look at David. David's anointed king, and what does he do? He's running for his life. He's in the wilderness for many years, running from Saul before he becomes king. You have Elijah, who had to run into the wilderness. He's hiding in caves from Jezebel. He runs to the mountain to meet with God. Moses is led, and he runs into the wilderness to flee Egypt, and eventually he's called back to bring his people out of Egypt. The Apostle Paul, after he encounters Jesus on the road to Damascus, Jesus gives him his instructions of what he's going to do in his life. But what does Paul do? He spends 3 years in the wilderness before he ever walks into the new season of ministering to these Gentiles. And I would imagine every one of those people felt inadequate in some point of their season. Like the Apostle Paul, after persecuting Christians for all those years, I would imagine when God calls him to go back and minister to people, that he's like, who am I to do that? I've been persecuting Christians all these years, And so he can't see himself as someone who can go and minister to Gentiles and bring them into the way. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. But God had to teach him through the wilderness and prepare him for that new season. So anyway, going back to my story, in 2020, when we experienced everything that we did during COVID, we all experienced this wilderness, and many of us lost jobs. Many of us just went through complete disruptions to everything that we were doing. And my husband and I both ended up without work for 2 months. Our business was completely shut down. There was no one allowed to come in. And so we couldn't work for 2 months, and we're like, how are we going to take care of things? How are we going to pay our bills if we can't work? Somehow God provided through that season. We had people that were generous that showed up unexpectedly and sent us a check, or God provided through other means through that season in unusual ways. And when we went back to work, I had previously had a good amount of clients, and I went from having 5 clients to having only 1 client. And then eventually that client left and moved, and then I couldn't train that person anymore. And so I was down to no clients. And my husband was still able to keep quite a few clients, even though there were several that were afraid to come back in the gym. And we had this predicament because a lot of the clients that we had were older. We were working with retirees, and most of them didn't want to do online training. They're just not tech savvy and not necessarily wanting to do training online. They want more hands-on training. But then there were people that were afraid to come in because they didn't want to get sick and they were worried about it. And so we were trying to navigate this new normal and trying to figure out how we're going to survive through this season where we can't work the way that we were working before. And it was very difficult. So all of a sudden, my husband comes home one day. I had no clients at all. So I'm back to square one, trying to figure out what I'm going to do. And I remember my husband came home and he said, hey, there's this opportunity I found out about at this other club. You can work the front desk a couple days a week and pick up clients there, train the clients on the other days. You get paid an hourly rate on the days that you work the front desk. which wasn't a lot of money. But I was thinking, well, I can pick up clients there, train them Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Hopefully I can build up a clientele and then I'll get back on my feet again. And I didn't even pray about it. I just took this job and I started working there for about 9 months and it felt like nothing would work out. Like I could get a client for a few weeks and then they would back out because they didn't want to pay for it anymore. It wasn't as a high end of a club as what we had trained at before. I couldn't seem to just get things going there. So I was just making very little money, working the front desk a couple days a week. It was very boring because there was not a lot of people coming in. It was super quiet. They had all these regulations around who could come in the gym with guests and everything. Toward the end of that 9 months, I remember going to work and I had this crazy thing happen with this man that came in and we weren't allowed to have guests in the gym. And so I had a couple of people come in that looked like they were underage. And I asked them if they were guests and they said yes. And then I said, well, I'm sorry, you have to come in later. They have guest hours between this time and this time. And it wasn't like I wanted to do that, but it was just the regulations of the club. And it was a club for retired individuals. And so it was very noticeable if someone was younger who was in the gym and it would upset the other members. So, it was like navigating all of these rules and weird things that were going on at that time. And the girls ended up like lying to me and saying, after they had already said they were guests, like, oh no, we live here. And then they had to ask for their member number. I was like, all right, whatever. I'll let them work out. I'm not going to make a big thing of it. But anyway, the father comes in and suddenly just gets in my face, slams his fist on my desk, yells in my face, and threatens me. I remember being pretty terrified. I'd never had a man in a workplace scenario, especially I was by myself. There was no one working with me. I was alone most of the day there, except for when there was like another trainer in the gym or someone teaching a class. I was there alone for most of the day. And this guy got in my face, screaming at me. I was terrified. And I had to call the main office. I had to tell them what happened. And the main office was quite a ways away. It was like on the other side of this parking lot, quite a distance from where this gym was. Then I had to start asking for security to patrol the area. I mean, it was a little bit ridiculous. And I was coming to work thinking, this is crazy. Like, I'm not getting paid enough for this. This isn't worth coming to work for when I'm dealing with this. There was someone else I encountered at the gym. I won't get into that, but I discovered he had a criminal history, doing some serious crimes in another country. And I was like, whoa, what am I doing? How did I get here? I was walking into the gym one day and I was saying to myself, I don't want to be here today. I just really don't want to be here. And I remember hearing the Holy Spirit so clearly. It wasn't an audible voice, but it was so clear. He said to me, I didn't tell you to take this job. And I remember being like, huh? And I thought, I've been here for like 9 months. I never asked the Lord if I should be here. But in previous seasons of my life, God would just keep all these doors closed. And anytime I tried to do something, it wouldn't work out unless it was the right thing. And then it would just like the door would open and I would walk through it. And I would know, oh, this is the Lord. I can walk through this door. Like, this is clearly the Lord. And he would just not open the doors unless it was the door I'm supposed to walk through. So I got so used to that I just expected, because there was an opportunity, that I could take it. I never questioned it. But I remember I started talking to him about that. And I was like, I'm so sorry I didn't ask you. I just assumed this was what I was supposed to do. And I was kind of always a driven type of personality back then. Even in my old job, I was always pushing through and kind of ambitious and really wanting to succeed. Suddenly, it's like the Lord's putting the brakes on and I'm asking him, what do you want me to do now? Like, what do you want me to do? I don't know what to do. Like, nothing's working out. I tried to become a personal trainer. I tried to get these clients over here, try to do this over here. And I felt him tell me, I need you to rest. And I'm like, rest? What do you mean rest? I felt him telling me to rest and I didn't understand it. But there was this sense that I needed to spend time with him and I needed to study the scriptures more. And I sensed that he was like, this is your opportunity to spend time with me, to get to know me, to seek me. And he's like, you're not always going to have this time, so take advantage of it. Sometimes we get into this place of dryness and there's this sense that something's wrong, that we've done something wrong, or we need to figure out how to fix it. And there's this self-sufficiency that kicks in where we feel like we got to do the next thing. We've got to find the next thing. But we don't always stop to ask, God, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to take on this new thing? Do you want me to fight against whatever I'm feeling? Is this opposition I'm facing that I need to push through? Or is this opposition that's coming actually because you're trying to stop me from doing something? And those are the things that we have to learn to ask, I think, when we get into a dry season or a wilderness season, because sometimes God's asking us to sit down. And I know that sounds crazy. It doesn't make sense. But if God asks you to take a rest, to take a sabbatical, to put things down for a season, there's a reason for it. And so that was a season in my life where he called me to take a break, and I didn't really understand it, but I knew there were things in my life that I believed about myself, and there were things that I believed about God that just weren't true. And he was beginning to dismantle those things. And that's what he does in a wilderness season. He'll begin to dismantle the lies that we've believed about God, the lies we've believed about ourselves, and he'll begin to show us the truth of who he is for us and who he's made us to be. Not what he's made us to do, but he'll teach us how to be. And that was the season I was in, was he was like, I want you to learn how to be right now, not to get your value from what you do, but to get your value from me. And that was a really hard thing for me to do. It was not as easy as I thought it would be. Sitting down and deciding to lay aside the things that I thought I was supposed to put my hands to was not easy, but I did it. And what ended up happening was the things began to surface in my heart. What ended up surfacing was that realization that I had put my value in my work, because I felt such a dissatisfaction and such a restlessness with that season of rest. It took me a while to get to a place where I was comfortable resting. When I had to take time to rest and not strive to provide for myself or make something happen, I found myself feeling almost like I didn't have value anymore. And that was a lie, but it was something that I had to walk through to get to a place where I recognized that my value is in who God said I am, not in what I do for a living. I remember feeling shame around not working. When people would bring it up, or when people would ask me, why aren't you working right now? I didn't have an answer for them. And sometimes, especially if they just wouldn't understand where I was coming from, there was that feeling of being misunderstood and the shame around that. And that was a feeling of embarrassment at the time. But I had to get over that because I knew God had called me to do that and to just begin to allow him to work in my life. And then eventually, after some time, he began to speak to me about starting this podcast. But it was a time of really wrestling with him about some things that he was doing in my life. There were things I had to lay down, wrong belief systems I had to lay down, and questions I needed answered. And through that time, he really worked in me. He really began to show me who he really is. He began to take things that I believed about what he said in scripture that maybe was conflicting with where he was calling me. There were things that he had spoken to me about my future that I struggled with because of my background and what I had grown up hearing. That's when I began to dig into the cultural background of the Bible and understanding what was being said and who was it being said to and why was it being said. And that really helped to remove the condemnation I felt around certain passages of the Bible about how I saw God, some of the shame I felt in my own life, some of the things that I had been believing that just weren't true. So there's a transformation taking place when we are going through a dry season. It may feel like there's nothing happening in your life. You may feel like you're in a barren place. There's no life happening. There's nothing growing. There's nothing being cultivated. And you're like, what is going on, Lord? Why am I in this season? What are you doing to me right now? What are you doing? He may be bringing up things in your heart that you didn't even know were there. Maybe there's some disappointment with God. Maybe there's some anger. Maybe there's some shame around some things that you've walked through, and God is wanting to heal those things. And it's only when we slow down and we get quiet in that place of quiet and stillness that we begin to hear. I think sometimes we're told in the wilderness season that we don't hear from the Lord because sometimes it feels like he's not as accessible, but that's just not true. It's just a matter of quieting ourselves to hear him. And He speaks to us a bit differently. He's drawing us closer to himself in that season. When I got to experience the land of Israel back in 2023, when I studied there for a couple months, I remember being in the Judean wilderness and that feeling of heat and that intensity. It's very intense. It's very dry. It's very hot. It's so intense. Like you're drinking water constantly and you can become dehydrated very quickly. Back in the biblical times, they had wild beasts that they had to contend with. We don't have lions and things like that in Israel now, but they were there back then. There's that fear that can come in of like, am I going to survive this? But at the same time, there's a quiet, there's a peace, there's a stillness there. You can hear the wind. It's really quiet. It's just like you and the Lord. You're in this wilderness place, but you're being led by the Lord. He's leading you just like a shepherd would lead his sheep in the wilderness. And he's speaking to you, but you have to tune into him. You have to be able to quiet yourself enough to hear. And so that's why last week I talked about flourishing seasons and how important it is that we steward those seasons, that we maybe journal the things that God's doing in our life in previous seasons. We remember his faithfulness. We remember the things that he said. And also that we remember what he said to us before we went into a dry season. Because like I mentioned, God had spoken to me before I went into a dry season about what he had for me in the future. I couldn't receive it at the time fully. I had it in the back of my mind and I pondered it, but we have to remember the things that he said when we go into that dry season, because it will feel as though we're going in the opposite direction of the promises that he's given us. The things that he's spoken over our life will feel as though they're so far away when we're in a wilderness season. We can't even imagine how it will ever happen because it feels like we're going in the complete opposite direction. But if we can remember what he said and hold on to it, we will do far better. We will do far better as we move forward, because the temptation that always comes when we're in a season like that is, did God really say what he said? But I just want to encourage you, if you're in a dry season, don't give up. Keep pressing into the Lord and listening for his voice. Spend time in the word. Spend time seeking him. Ask him to reveal himself to you. Those things that he brings up in your heart, bring them to him. Let him into those places. He's safe. He's trustworthy. He will reveal himself to you. He will heal you of the things that need to be healed if you'll let him in. If you don't let him in, he can't do the work. But if you will let him in, he will begin to transform your heart. He'll begin to transform your life, and he will get you ready for that next season. I hope you're encouraged as you listen to this, that you are right where you need to be. You haven't done anything wrong to get yourself in this place. God is just bringing you into a new season. He's getting you ready for something new. It often is all the things that you've walked through in your life have prepared you for this. You're going to be able to look back and see everywhere that God has brought you and how he's built upon one season to the next to bring you into this new place that you're heading into. If you happen to be in a place right now where you're navigating a transition or a wilderness season and you're a woman looking for some support, I have some coaching spots available. You can visit my website, NicoleDelaney.com. I would be more than happy to walk alongside of you. I don't have all the answers, but I will help you connect more clearly to the voice of God. We will explore some of these things that God's doing in your life as we work together. So feel free to reach out to me. My email is info@NicoleDelaney.com, but you can also find a scheduling on my website to schedule a call with me. So I look forward to hearing from you, and I am looking forward to talking with you again soon. Have a great week. Thanks.